Hello. This evening I would like to talk to you about the types and the quantities of work that you need to do if you hope to work towards the goal of becoming fluent in a foreign language. I made a video not too long ago where I talked about the, false hope or desire many people have of learning a language fast, and there I stressed that it took years to develop reasonable, respectable abilities in a language. And so in this video I wish to go into more detail about that. I think just as people have that false hope that it's possible to learn a language fast, many people sort of have the hope that there's something magical or secret that one can do to make you fluent in a language. Do this and you'll end up fluent, or to guarantee that you will end up fluent in a language. That's just not the case. It's a long-term goal to work forward to, and you may get there, or you may get as close as you can if you follow the steps that I'm doing, but there's really no guarantee that you'll be able to become truly fluent. So let's start out by talking about that. Many people, I think everybody agrees that fluent means really well, or to master a language, but people have different definitions of what it means to master a language or speak it really well. So I think the best definition there is to say near native. You're not a native, so you shouldn't try to pass yourself off one or think that you're going to be just like one, but you can get your ability to express yourself in a language and to understand a language to be in the comparable range of skills and abilities of a native speaker, of an educated native speaker. A highly educated, well-educated native speaker, I think, should be the goal for somebody with linguistic aspirations. So let's stop and think about that. What does it take to become a highly educated, well-educated native speaker? You have to have a good education all throughout your youth, go to university, and probably get a graduate degree, a master's degree in something that requires you to continually develop your linguistic skills. So how old are you going to be then? 24, 25? It takes a quarter of a century to become a well-educated, highly educated native speaker. So if we keep that in mind, I don't think we should be shocked or scared or frightened when we hear that it takes sometimes decades to develop fluency in a foreign language as well. As a matter of fact, we can flip that around and say, we're getting at a discount. If I can become fluent in a foreign language in 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 years, that's much less time than it takes me to do so in my native language, because obviously we don't have to go through the childhood acquisition, Piaget's stages of learning. We can transfer a lot of skills and the like. But yes, it's a process, if you're going to get there, that is going to take a lot of hard work over a number of years, and years obviously are broken down into quality hours that you put into it over the course of those years. So I think that there are 3 distinct stages that one needs to sort of systematically go through if you hope to end up fluent, or as close to fluent as you can, in a foreign language. And I'm going to talk about 3 different ways or approaches that you can have to going through these stages. So the first stage, I think, is obviously the most important, critical stage, is that's the foundational, fundamental stage of really systematically and thoroughly understanding the structure, the grammar, and the base vocabulary, the core vocabulary, the 5,000-6,000 most commonly used words, getting this vocabulary, this structure, these rules into you so that you really know it very well. That's the first step that you ought not to skimp on if you hope to become fluent in a foreign language. So how can you do that, and how long does that take in terms of hours or years? Again, there's about 3 main models that you could do. One thing, theoretically, to learn a language. If you can join the military or the diplomatic corps, you can be sent to the Foreign Service Institute, and you'll be trained as sort of a full-time job for the first part of your service. So I'm going to talk about the number of hours that it takes to, I think, learn the most commonly studied or languages of interest, such as Spanish and French and German. But then I'll talk a little bit more about harder language also towards the end. So if you were to go to the Foreign Service Institute, they say they need 24 weeks to train you in Spanish, 30 weeks for French, 36 for German. A week there is Monday through Friday. You have 5 hours, contact hours, 5 hours of classes, and you're also required to do homework, obviously, and prepare and study, so about 3 hours a day. So you're doing this 40 hours a week for 6, 7, 8, 9 months. And at the end of this, you're not fluent, but you are have attained professional working capacity. That ought to be the goal. So if you break that down into the number of hours, they say they need about 960 hours to get you to that level in Spanish, 1,200 to get you in French, and 1,440 to get you that in German. That's a lot of hours. And I think that the reason it's that many is precisely because it's an intensive program, which is quite grueling. And it is, as I've talked about, learning a language is a year-long process. And if you're trying to condense that into a number of months, this is one way that you can do it fast. But obviously you have to pay by putting out more energy. And thankfully, again, this is sort of just a theoretical model for most people. Unless you're in the military or the foreign service, you can't go there. And it's hard to find another way to pause your life and just spend 6, 7, 8, 9 months doing nothing but learning a language. I think these other two ways that I'm about to describe now are more accessible to most people. And the first one, well, the second one, or the first of the other way, the second way is to take a class, get a teacher and have somebody teach it to you. Take a class. And I think the most common model, the one I'm most familiar with, you could also do it in a language institute or school, is to do it at a university, take a university course. So it's my repeated experience, both as a student and as a professor, that 4 semesters of a course, a language course that is well taught in a good school and a good institute with a good teacher is enough to get you to the point when you can go into your 5th semester and you will be reading, writing, and speaking the language. So that's going to total up to not quite that many hours. You're going to have each semester is about 45 hours, and you're supposed to spend 3 hours for each studying or preparing or doing homework or reading for each contact hour. So we're talking about 180 hours per semester. So that's 720 hours over a 2-year period using a basic standard college teaching method that works to get you to that level. And the third model for learning a language is to teach it to yourself autodidactically. And this is, I think, the most efficient one because you might need about the same number of hours to do it as the college hours. So if you start teaching yourself a language using some of the techniques that I've talked about, you might start out with just 15, 20 minutes a day, but ultimately you're going to work up to an hour a day too. So it might be a little less than an hour a day over about a 2-year period as well, is probably what you need to systematically go through a number of different types of textbooks. Perhaps if you find one that's beginning, intermediate, different levels, different types of textbooks that might give you intuitive methods, grammar translation methods. You definitely want to go through, if you're teaching yourself, a systematic grammar at some point at the end, some pattern drills if you need that kind of thing. But at a certain point, you'll realize, there's nothing new that I haven't seen before. I've covered all the ground. And when you've done that too, at the end of this first stage, you will also have put in 600, 700 hours to get to that. And you will be ready to move on to the second stage after you've given yourself this firm foundation, thorough overview of the grammatical structure and the basic vocabulary. So the second stage is, if we can refer to the first stage as being foundational, the second stage is you are consolidating your knowledge, and more than anything else, I think it's really important to expand your vocabulary. 5,000 or 6,000 words is enough to cover everyday conversation, but you need 20,000 words to pick up any odd novel and well-written literary novel and read that with ease. So, and it gets harder and harder to learn the words as they are in greater and greater, lesser and lesser frequency ranges. So, going back to the different models, what would happen to you if you were trained to intensively to get to professional working capacity? The next step is they would put you to work in it. So you're already working 40 hours a week, so you can't really do more there. So hopefully you'll get more exposure and different types of exposure rather than being put into sort of a routine job. But that is my understanding too, is that often you're trained to do a specific task, and so you kind of it's harder to move forward probably in this model than in these other two models. In the college class model, you might, if you're really doing it systematically, when you go to university, you would spend the first 2 years taking this course and getting yourself, after about 720 hours, roughly a 2-year period, you'd be capable of reading, writing, and speaking the language. And if you liked that enough to say, major in the language, then for the next 2 years, you would end up probably taking 2 courses, or maybe even 3 per semester, so easily doubling the amount of time. So in the second 2 years, where you are going to consolidate your knowledge and expand your vocabulary, you are going to double the amount of time that you put into it. So you're going to follow the same basic pattern if you are wanting to teach yourself a language. I would say that if you've taken about an hour a day over about a 2-year period to get yourself to that ability to read, write, and speak it, then you need to take another 2 years to really consolidate your knowledge and expand your vocabulary. And this is where I think I have the most to say. So I'm going to talk about the best way to do this while teaching yourself. If you're taking a class, let the teacher do it. If you're teaching yourself, you need to be careful that you do a couple of things. You need to, depending on you, your personality, the way you learn, your opportunities, you get as much speaking and listening and watching movies and listening to music type opportunities you can. If you can do an intensive immersion stay, as I've talked about not recently, that would be perfect too. But right when you get down to it, I think that far and away the best thing you need to do in this next 2-year period is to read books and listen to audiobooks and shadow audiobooks at the same time that you listen to them and read along with them. Reading is proven beyond any shadow of a doubt to be the vocabulary range that you need to read books is greater than it is for other aspects of listening or speaking to a language. So when you're trying to learn language, the goal here should be you go into this after the first 2 years, you probably know about 5,000-6,000 of the most common words. In these next 2 years, without necessarily, tracking the numbers, you should aspire to sort of double or maybe even treble your vocabulary. Get to know about 12,000, maybe 15,000 words through the kinds of reading that I talked about in another video I made not too long ago about reading in a foreign language. Intensive reading, where you really sit with a dictionary and look everything up, or extensive reading, where you just try to find something at your appropriate level and you read on and on and on and acquire vocabulary by context because you're following the story. And then what I call realistic reading, making sort of a compromise there where you don't just keep reading, but you reread each page or each chapter a number of times. Another really good way at this stage of, I would say perhaps even jump-starting the extensive reading process is what you can do apart from reading, trying to find books that are at your level. One way you can do that is to concentrate on you can read things first in your language, in English, and then in the target language. So if you're studying one of these widely studied languages like French, German, Spanish, you might be able to find things that are originally written in these languages. So you read the English translation and then the original one of these. The international publishing and distribution agencies kind of see to it. I think there are more books that are originally written in English and translated into these languages. At this stage, this second stage of wide vocabulary expansion, what you're after is to ultimately see, hear, say, understand hundreds of thousands of sentences, well-constructed sentences that employ all of the rules that you studied in the first 2 years. And as I said, to double your vocabulary into the range of words that pretty much every educated speaker knows these words, but you don't necessarily use them every day or very commonly. So they're harder to learn and acquire. So this extensive reading process through ideally listening or reading a book once in your language, in English, and then a while later reading it again so you already know the story will really help you do that. Anybody who follows me knows that I'm pretty highbrow. I think the ultimate goal of learning a language is to read the highest quality literature that's expressive in that language. But in this second stage, if you can stomach it, I think it's really okay to go more lowbrow so that you can keep that interest of extensive reading. If you can find some page turners, thrillers or mysteries or something, action-driven things so that the story is easier to understand. Again, as I talked about in the extensive reading video, getting to a 98% comprehension level is quite hard. So if you're dealing with complex ideas, that's where you need it. But if it's an action-driven, plot-driven story, it's much easier to understand, particularly if you've read it beforehand. So if you spend about 2 years, 2 hours a day, primarily reading and listening to audiobooks of this type, at the end of these 2 years, you will have this consolidated knowledge and this much greatly expanded vocabulary. So now you're ready to move on to the third and final and most important stage if you really want to become fluent, that is, have near native abilities. Again, with the training model, they have special advanced training levels or try to plug you in various things. I'm not so familiar with that as I am with the academic model. The academic model, you could say it's the exact same principle. If you were to go from taking one class per semester to learn a language for 2 years and then majoring in the language, so you're going to take about 2 classes per semester. So you're going to double the amount of time you spend with it. If you go further beyond there, as an undergraduate, you're still got your distribution requirements and other things. But then if you go to graduate school, if you decide to, pursue doctoral or graduate master's studies, at least in a foreign language, that's the only thing you're going to be studying. So for those first, say, 2 years of classwork for your graduate degree, all you'll study is the language. So you've gone from one class per semester to 2 classes per semester to now maybe 4 classes per semester. So again, you're doubling the amount of hours that you're putting in at this level. So I think the self-teaching model should definitely follow that. If you go to graduate school or major in a language as an undergraduate, certainly you're going to have an opportunity to do hopefully a semester or a year abroad, spend some time, and the same thing needs to be followed for teaching yourself a language. In this third and final stage, which we might call the refining or polishing stage, ideally, this is done when you go live in the language. You can't always arrange your life to do that, but if one of your goals is to become fluent in a foreign language, it's much easier if you're living surrounded by it all day, every day, and hearing it and encountering than if you're divorced from it. Even if you can't go, though, I would say some of the important steps and stages to do in teaching yourself to become fluent in a foreign language. If you haven't done it in the second stage, when you consciously enter the third stage, you need to consciously do something to your conscious mind. You need to say you're making the commitment. I'm going now from spending 2 hours a day on my language to spending 4 hours on my language. And even maybe only this, but if beyond that, to the greatest extent possible, I want to consciously change my operating system. If you're serious about becoming fluent in a foreign language, turn English off. Stop thinking in English all the time. Make a commitment to thinking in the language as much as you can. This is a stage when you need to bring as much metacognition, awareness of the learning process as possible to the way that you sound, the things that you say, and you need to make a commitment to doing deliberate practice towards correcting and changing any of these things. So ideally, you're in the country, you're thinking in the language, and also ideally, at this stage, you really need to hunt down and get somebody to help you, a very, very highly linguistically trained teacher, private tutor, who understands phonetics and can really listen to you and give you feedback you might not be able to give yourself, who can tell you, your t sound is too labiodental. It needs to be more dental. Or you're using this construction. It's not wrong, but we just don't say it that way anymore. And you say it all the time. It's a carryover from English. So somebody who can point out things to you like this. And then at this stage, a couple of months at least, maybe not the entire next 2 years, but if you can systematically work at eliminating or correcting or changing one of these things at a time, then you'll go a long way towards perfecting your knowledge, refining and polishing your knowledge. And though, what are you supposed to be doing apart from this? So you got 4 hours a day now. You're committing to work on the language, and if you take an hour and a half, I would say not more than 2 hours to work with the tutor, do the spot checking, do the metacognitive, the deliberate practice, get other kinds of conversational listening practice. The main thing that you should still be doing here is focusing on reading. And this is where we go highbrow. This is where we say, at this stage, if I want to become fluent in the language, I need to read the classics, all the classic literary tradition in this language. A language is a vehicle of a culture and of various mindsets, ways of thinking that come with the culture. And so to be fluent in a language means not just mastering the rules and the vocabulary and pronunciation. It means understanding the cultural references. It means knowing that legacy, knowing that tradition. And so this is when it's time to really plunge into reading the classic works in this language. And if you got interested in language first, you might have read them in translation a long time before. This is not a time to keep doing it in the second stage when you try to prepare yourself. No, this is a time when you need to delve deeply into the language and be immersed in it. And particularly if you're reading, say, 17th, 18th, 19th century works, there'll still be a lot of vocabulary you don't know, but you should have a high enough vocabulary now that just as you navigate something like Moby Dick, an early 19th century English novel that's set on a whaling ship, you don't have any cultural references. You just have to learn what vocabulary to pay attention to and what you can do without. And you're still expanding your vocabulary range at this time. So another part of deliberate practice is to take the new words that you encounter and write them down and make a point of using them. You want to write a lot at this stage too. You want to keep a journal or a diary. That too is something you can show to your tutor. So you don't want to write your most intimate thoughts, but to express yourself. Do everything that you can to really make a conscious effort to improve. Again, there's no guarantee you'll be satisfied with your final results all the time. But a lot of people who do have these goals get stuck on plateaus and get frustrated. And if they really look into their heart, they say, am I doing everything that I can? Maybe you are. And then that's the way it is. But maybe you're not. I mean, just think of all the immigrants that you might happen to know, who move to a new language, a new linguistic environment for the rest of their lives, and yet quite never rise any higher. They come to a plateau where it's kind of good enough. So if you don't want to be stuck on a plateau, employ some of these metacognitive techniques and ideas of spot checking and doing deliberate practice to correct one thing at a time. And above all, reading great literature, plunging into it and understanding the cultural references that come from the language. So what I was talking about was for French, German, and Spanish. Which, again, the Foreign Service Institute says that their Spanish is easier. In my experience at the academic level, teaching it in college level, there's no distinction between these three languages, nor is there in teaching them to yourselves. But they make a distinction in their institute where they also give a lot of figures that are commonly quoted. Then they have the really difficult languages, such as the East Asian languages and Arabic, which they say you need 88 weeks of study, so a total of 3,520 hours in their training to get to professional working capacity, and to then they lump all other languages together pretty much, from Slavic languages to Indian languages, African languages, and to me, I have real wonders about that. I mean, I think we can make greater distinctions between levels of difficulty, but basically, if it takes 2 years of focusing to build a foundation and 2 more years of double the amount of effort to refine your skills, to consolidate and expand your vocabulary, and then double your effort again to really polish your language. In theory, I think it's attainable, possibly attainable, to get to fluency in a language like French, German, or Spanish in about 6 years. For a language like Russian or Polish or Slavic language or Celtic language, it might be 9 years. For an African or an Indian or Southeast Asian language, it might be 12 years. And for these difficult languages, it might be 15 years. So, but if you work systematically in this kind of fashion, if you don't get there, you'll get as close as you possibly can. So that is what I have to say. Those are my thoughts on striving towards fluency in a foreign language. I hope that was useful to you and helpful for you in your studies, and I will talk to you again next week. Thank you for listening.